Messages from the Senate Conference Committee report. The clerk will report the messages from the Senate.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce the passage that the Senate has concurred and adopted the report of the Conference Committee on Senate File Number 1647, an act relating to transportation. The Conference Committee is addressed to the Honorable Sandra L. Pappas, President of the Senate, and the Honorable Kurt L. Doudt, Speaker of the House. We, the undersigned conferees for Senate File Number 1647, report that we have agreed upon the items in dispute and recommend as follows. The Conference Committee's report is signed by all 5 members of the Senate and all 5 conferees on the part of the House. Kelly moves that the report of the Conference Committee on Senate File Number 1647 be adopted and that the bill be repassed as amended by the Conference Committee.
I recognize the author, the gentleman from Goodhue, Chairman Kelly, who will explain the report.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. House File 1647 is our transportation bill. I am glad to report that Senate File 1647 passed unanimously off the Senate floor, 65-0. I first also like to once again thank Representative Hornstein as Vice Chair of the Transportation Committee. I'd also like to thank Representative Earhart and Representative Norton for sitting on our conference committees, where we really got to hear this bill about 4 times as we went through a couple of conference committees. And this is the transportation bill that provides base funding for the Department of Transportation, the Met Council, and portions of the Department of Public Safety. In addition to the base funding, now the committee was given a target of $30 million to make limited but strategic investments in key areas with an eye towards really a great opportunity for 2016. What we do know is that we will be able to come into 2016 with House File 4 and all of the work that we've done through Transportation Committee already with that bill as it stands. So we look forward to that, and I look forward to working with Senator Dibble on that. First, a little bit of clarification for all of our counties, cities, and towns. This bill still allows for the normal flow of funds for transportation. The Highway User Tax Distribution Fund, which distributes funds to our trunk highways, counties, municipalities, and townships, still is forecasted to have $4 billion distributed through that fund. To our bill, it allows for some of our key priorities. One, making $12.5 million available for small cities. That's approximately 700 cities across the state of Minnesota that now have dedicated funds for their projects. The bill also addresses rail safety. We put in approximately 2.5 times the amount that we were able to do the last biennium by putting $5 million to the rail grade safety account. We have $900,000 for 2 emergency response teams that can specifically respond for any types of incidents. We've had the discussion of rail safety here on the floor several times and in committee, and we are absolutely poised to make sure that we're as responsive as we can be in the event of some catastrophe. We've got a transit. We start with $5 million investment for Greater Minnesota Transit so they can continue their services across outstate areas. It captures $30 million in unobligated and unspent funds and moves it to the Met Council where they can use it for their transit initiatives. We expect about approximately $6 million of those funds to go to Metro Mobility. We also have developed $2 million for suburban transit providers for pilot projects. And then the bill also includes $3 million for the ports so that they can make infrastructure upgrades that allow them to grow their regional economic contributions. And lastly, the bill accepts policy provisions that were accepted in the conference committees as well as those that we heard throughout the committee process over the last several months. This includes health insurance benefits for volunteer firefighters and their families, allowing aerodynamic tails for trucks, requiring proof of auto insurance for the time of, at the time of registering a vehicle, and increasing the fines for second and subsequent offenses for texting while driving. We also, one provision that we allowed for $200,000 for the transportation management organizations. That was Representative Hornstein's initiative. And with that, Mr. Speaker and members, that is the transportation bill, and I stand for questions.
Is there any discussion to the conference committee report? The lady from St. Louis, Representative Moline.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will Representative Kelly yield for a question?
He will yield. The lady from St. Louis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Kelly, when you had brought your transportation bill, sorry, I can't see you over there because the clerk's desk is kind of between us, but when you had brought up your transportation bill on the House floor yesterday, it was originally a finance bill and it included provisions for Highway 53 that you then did a delete all amendment and turned it into a policy bill to bring it into conference committee. And I'm just wondering what happened with the Highway 53 provisions that were in your bill yesterday until you removed them. What happened to them in conference committee?
The gentleman from Goodhue, Chairman Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Moran. The problem with that was the bonding being included in a Senate file, which we cannot do. So that was stripped out of that Senate file, so that from a constitutional standpoint, we took out the bonding and addressed all other issues.
Lady from St. Louis, Representative Moline.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will Representative Kelly yield for another question?
He will yield. The lady from St. Louis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Kelly, had you not done your delete all amendment yesterday and instead adopted a Senate file, would you have been able to have the Highway 53 provisions come out of conference committee?
The gentleman from Goodhue, Chair Kelly.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Moline, no, because that still would have been a Senate file, and you cannot have bonding originating in a Senate file.
The lady from St. Louis, Representative Moline.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and will Representative Kelly yield for another question?
He will yield. The lady from St. Louis.
Well, Representative Kelly, wasn't it a House file yesterday?
The gentleman from Goodhue, Chairman Kelly.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Moline, no, it was a Senate file.
The lady from St. Louis, Representative Moline.
Well, thank you,
Representative
Mr.
Moline.
Speaker. Will Representative Kelly yield for another question?
He will. The lady from St. Louis.
When the bill was calendared for yesterday, before you brought your delete all amendment, wasn't it a transportation finance bill?
The gentleman from Goodhue, Chair Kelly.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Moline, no, yesterday the file that we brought up was Senate File 1647. Our amendment was simply a delete all amendment.
The lady from St. Louis, Representative Moline.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will Representative Kelly yield for another question?
He will. The lady from St. Louis, Representative Moline.
Oh, Representative Kelly, didn't you delete all the finance provisions in your delete all amendment?
The gentleman from Goodhue, Chair Kelly.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Moline, regardless of what was stripped out of there, it is still a Senate file, and a Senate file cannot include bonding. That was the issue. That's why we had to go back to conference committee, and that's why we had to strip out the bonding. Regardless of what we stripped out, it remained a Senate file, so it could not include bonding in it.
Lady from St. Louis, Representative Moline. Or Representative Bly. Or Representative Moline.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I mean, I think what happened yesterday was some unintended consequences, basically. There was a bill up on the floor that included Highway 53 funding. That was the bill that you brought to the floor. Your side of the aisle then didn't want to hear any of the DFL amendments, and in order to get rid of all of our amendments and all discussion basically having to do with transportation, you brought a delete all amendment to the floor that deleted all the finance provisions so that you could go to conference committee and do all your work in conference committee where none of us could have a voice in the process, where none of us could discuss those provisions. And then I got an email from the governor's office notifying me of this bonding issue because we no longer had a House file. And so, I think members should just be aware that what happened yesterday was basically debate was completely stifled on the House floor regarding the transportation finance bill because we had a number of amendments that we wanted to bring up. That's what happened. Your side of the aisle didn't want to discuss amendments, and so you did a delete all amendment and you amended onto a small policy paragraph on the House floor, and then went to conference where all the work was done. And I would have liked to have had a voice in that discussion. I had planned on having that yesterday, but because of your delete all amendment, we weren't able to have that discussion on the House floor. So I just think members should be cognizant of what actually happened here, which was we had some unintended consequences and we weren't allowed to have a voice in the discussion. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Washington, Representative Schoen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And would Chair Kelly yield to a few questions?
He will yield. The gentleman from Washington, Representative Schoen.
Thank you. Representative Kelly, can you just give me a little bit of the insight on the $30 million in the unobligated and unspent, what accounts that came from, and the history of where that, how we came to that?
The gentleman from Goodhue, Chairman Kelly.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Schoen, that $30 million approximately were funds that were unencumbered and unspent due to the Southwest Light Rail. And as we know, with the increasing costs and over budgeted items, the governor's office, along with many of us, were deeply troubled by that and suggested, even the governor's office suggests we go back to the drawing board. So instead of throwing good money after bad, we discussed this with the Senate, and they agreed that repurposing those dollars towards Metro Transit and allowing them to use that really for their purposes where they were comfortable, we thought that would be a very good plan.
Gentleman from Washington, Representative Schoen.
If he'd continue to yield, Mr.
He
Speaker.
will yield. Representative Schoen.
On the, can you just give me a little insight into your bill as to how the Minnesota State Patrol fared in funding, and did their requests get met? As far as the percentages or any, are they going to have all the academies they need? Are they going to be able to get to full staff as it goes? Most of the public probably doesn't understand that. That actually comes through your division as the chair of the transportation, even though they're considered part of public safety.
The gentleman from Goodhue, Chair Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Schoen. Yes. The State Patrol was funded by, along with many of the other employee issues that we handled throughout the department. Any of the pay increases and the wage increases were funded. Some of the other issues that we were trying to do, along with other initiatives with our $7 billion tax or our transportation plan, were not funded. One of those was the Trooper Academy that we had dollars for that we could not fund.
Gentleman from Washington, Representative Schoen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, and I do appreciate that. This transportation bill, I think, is going to be looked at as, when you go to the store and it's the holidays and you get that sampler pack of beer, and there's that 12-pack and there's 2 of each in there, and all of a sudden you only find 4 out of the 12 that you really like. And it was really disappointing. I mean, those 4 were pretty amazing. Pretty good stuff. I mean, Representative Simonson and I have been beating everybody on the brow over this, over hazmat teams since we got elected in the last biennium, and we are I know I'm grateful that they're there. And then I do believe the motorcycle headlight bill, I appreciate that being in. I know the motorcycle groups around the state are pretty happy about that change. But it's just not quite enough, and it's almost like Representative Gruenhagen has said a few years ago, I'm just getting to the controversial stuff. And I'll warm this place up for what I think is going to come from a couple other members when we talk about the rail safety, because we didn't address that. You can say you put some in there, and it's related to rail safety in this grade crossing thing, but, I hope little Johnny's coming out, Representative Marquardt, because if he's down in Newport or St. Paul Park or Cottage Grove, there's a good chance he and his boots that he's supposed to pull himself up by their own straps are going to be burned up if one of these train crashes. And we just got to do so much better in that field, and this is enough for me to vote no on this bill. And we're not taking care of long-term transit needs. We're not taking care of long-term roads. I'll tell you what, if you're out in Wilmer and you're out in Benson on the way out, you hit Highway 12, Highway 23, get that finished off out by Representative Howe and Representative Baker's district, and Highway 12 and Representative Miller's district into Representative Baker's district. Oof, it's ugly. If you ever hauled a load of corn down Highway 12, you need a chiropractor about the time you get back home. And I know there's a lot of good chiropractors out there, Representative Baker, but you know, you shouldn't have to be to them every trip.
The lady from Hennepin, Representative Hortman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Kelly yield to a couple questions?
He will yield. The lady from Hennepin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Kelly, yesterday when we talked a little bit about this bill, you had indicated that you expected this bill to come back with provisions in it that would match the spreadsheet that you sent out yesterday on the House floor. And I'm comparing today's spreadsheet with yesterday's spreadsheet, and I'm noticing quite a few differences. And I wonder if you can let me know, did you make changes in all these areas?
The gentleman from Goodhue, Representative Kelly.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Hortman, if you'd be more specific, I could answer those questions.
The lady from Hennepin, Representative Hortman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So in yesterday's spreadsheet on page 3 of 10 for state road construction, the fiscal year 2014 and 15, the base was 1.794 billion, and there was a 400 million decrease in the state road construction budget. I didn't think we should be going down 400 million in the state road construction budget, but then in the spreadsheet that you passed out today on page 3 of 9, it looks like you're going down $270 million in the state road construction budget instead of 400 million. That's one example I found.
The gentleman from Goodhue, Chair Kelly.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Hortman, I'm not exactly sure what spreadsheet you're working off of because of any spreadsheets we were working with in conference committee. We're actually spending more in the trunk highway spending. So I'm really confused as to what spreadsheet you're working off of.
Lady from Hennepin, Representative Hortman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Kelly, I'm not saying whether you're spending more or less in today's bill than you were in yesterday's bill, just that it's substantially different in every area I've looked at. And so I was wondering if you could summarize, because I spent quite a bit of time studying yesterday's spreadsheet, and here we are 24 hours later with a completely different spreadsheet. So where did you make changes, and why did you make changes, if he would yield to that question?
He will yield. The gentleman from Goodhue, Chair Kelly.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Hortman, as you can understand, as we go through this process, we put a lot of stress on our staff when we're asking them to do many things at many times. A lot of this was due to the spend down on the trunk highway system when we also agreed on the fly to allow for the department to spend down the unreserved funds. We did have to make a number of adjustments there, but we did so, I guess, in good faith there as well, because we felt that encumbering the department was not the right thing to do there, so we allowed for them to utilize some of the unreserved funds.
The lady from Hennepin, Representative Hortman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If he would yield to this question, then, so was the major
He will yield.
change to increase the allowed spending in the trunk highway fund by $190 million spread out through many areas?
Gentleman from Goodhue, Chairman Kelly.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Hortman, you're right on, except for the number. It was 180.
The lady from Hennepin, Representative Hortman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Kelly. Another significant change, I don't know if it happened from yesterday, but my understanding from yesterday's bill is that there was money on the bottom line from the general fund, which is why we had some amendments relating to specific projects. And I was wondering if you took the money from the general fund off the bottom line and reallocated it to different areas. If he would yield.
He will yield. The gentleman from Goodhue, Chair Kelly.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Hortman, actually that had nothing to do with the target. The target remained the same. That was the issue between House File 4 and Senate File 1647. That was the issue there.
The lady from Hennepin, Representative Hortman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Kelly, then, so if you would yield to the question of, are you spending
He
less
will yield. Representative Hortman.
in general fund dollars in your transportation bill than the Ways and Means budget target would allow you to spend from the general fund?
Gentleman from Goodhue, Chairman Kelly.
Mr. Speaker and Representative Hortman, we are spending slightly less, but that is not that was part of the target issue. Now that it's a conference committee, it's not part of the overall budget issue.
The lady from Hennepin, Representative Hortman.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I would like to move to send this back to conference on, and I would ask for a roll call.
Roll call having requests are the 15 hands. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call.
Mr. Speaker and members.
Excuse me just a second here. Representative Hortman moves that the House refuse to adopt the conference committee report on Senate File 1647 and the bill be returned to the conference committee. A roll call has been requested. The lady from Hennepin, Representative Hortman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. So, Representative Kelly, the reason why I've moved to send this back to conference is there's 7 hours left in this legislative session, which is an eternity in legislative time, especially considering how talented the reviser's drafting staff is. And you have time to put together a bill that we could all vote for. My biggest concern is that you're reducing the state road construction budget by $270 million in the next biennium over the current biennium. And $1.74 billion in 2014 and 15 buys a lot of road construction. But part of what we've all been talking about this year in this session is it's short. We're not able to do the projects that we feel we need to do. And so decreasing the state road construction budget is absolutely the wrong direction to go. And at the same time that you decrease the state road construction budget by $270 million, so that's $270 million less of construction in the next 2 years than what we had in the last 2 years, you increase the debt service line item by $100 million. So the way I see that, and the way we've talked about that in the transportation community for a long time, is we're giving money to bond houses in New York to pay interest rather than spending that money on projects in Minnesota where they create jobs, they improve safety, and they improve our ability to get from point A to point B. So given my limited time to review the spreadsheet on the basis of the state road construction and the highway debt service changes alone, I think, members, we should vote to refuse to adopt.
Any discussion? John from Hennepin, Representative Hornstein.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and members. I strongly urge support for the Hortman motion. And we'll talk probably more extensively about the flaws with this bill and this approach later on, but there's many reasons why this should be sent back to conference committee. And you know, one is, of course, the issue that Representative Hortman raised, but you know, we actually have an incredible opportunity here in our session. Both parties agree that transportation is a priority, and yet what we have to vote on after all of this is a status quo bill. In fact, Representative Hortman's pointing out that it might even be a little worse than the status quo. And so we're not doing anything to address the road need. We're just kind of doing the same thing we're doing now. We're not doing anything in terms of transit. There's that little bit of money that Representative Kelly talked about related to the Met Council, but it's still very much a status quo bill on transit. And then the third issue that any transportation bill ought to be addressing is oil train safety. And I've had a number of colleagues already get up on this, but I'm going to use this opportunity to correct something that Representative Kelly has said a couple of different times, which is that this year we're doing 2.5 times more than we did last year, and that somehow this is some kind of step forward. Well, here's the problem. What we did last year was a down payment on what we knew had to be a much larger investment in this. And part of what we did last year was ask MnDOT to do a report about what the number is in terms of rail grade safety investments. And that was in excess of $320 million. So while the statement is made that we did twice as much as last year, we're still doing 62 times less than what MnDOT has identified the need to be. So that, members, in and of itself, is a reason to send this back to conference committee. Members, we're going to eventually, I hope, vote no on this bill, but we have a chance to make it better and improve it and increase the level of support that I know our side on the aisle really wants to have in terms of transportation. So please vote yes on the Hortman motion.
Discussion to the motion to refuse to adopt the conference committee report. Members, a green vote means that we refuse to adopt the conference. A red vote means just the opposite. With that, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. There being 61 ayes and 72 nays, the Hortman motion is not adopted. Discussion. Gentleman from Clay, Representative Marquardt.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker and members, and I'm very disappointed with the amount of money for oil rail safety. It simply is inadequate, and what really concerns me is that there doesn't seem to really be a serious approach on the real dangers that we have. Back in July 2 years ago at 1:15 in the morning in a city of about 6,000, Lac Mégantic, Quebec, a 74-car rail train with Bakken oil went off the tracks and exploded. The explosion that night was equivalent to 900 tons of TNT. The blast radius was about 6/10 of a mile, the blast radius. 30 buildings were completely demolished immediately, and later on 36 of the remaining 39 in town had to be destroyed because of all the petroleum. They were still pumping petroleum out of the storm sewers 3 months after the derailment and explosion. And then we talk about the lives that were lost. 47 people were killed from that oil train explosion. And in fact, 5 days after the explosion, they could only positively identify one body because the other ones were burned so badly. And out of the 47 that died, they never found 5. They figure those people were just vaporized at the explosion. Members, we shouldn't be making games with this when we talk about we increase funding 2.5 times to try to make light, as Representative Hornstein just mentioned. $5 million when the Department of Transportation has identified about $330 million of needs to make our rail crossings safer. 5 to 7 trains, oil trains from the Bakken, come in through our state every day. Each of them about 100 cars. Each car about 30,000 gallons of volatile crude oil. In the last year, I think, Representative Hornstein, there's been six derailments and explosions, with several of those from the oil from the Bakken. MnDOT identified that within a half mile of the railroad, about 326,000 people live within a half mile. And members, we know the communities where these oil trains are coming through. Moorhead, Dilworth, Detroit Lakes, Frazee, Perham, Wadena, Staples, Little Falls, St. Cloud, Red Wing, Winona. Then another route, again through Moorhead, Breckenridge, Morris, Benson, Wilmer, Marshall, Pipestone. They are going right by our homes and our schools and our hospitals and our businesses every single day. So I hear, well, you know what? Most of the accidents, none of them have occurred at crossings. Well, right now that's true. It hasn't been at a crossing. That part is true. But why in the world would we not want to do everything possible that we could to make our communities as safe as they could be? We can't control what the federal government's going to do. It'd be nice if they'd make the crude oil less volatile. It'd be nice if they'd speed up the amount of time to repair the cars so they wouldn't explode and puncture as easy. But I will tell you that last year alone, there were 47 train vehicle accidents. 47. 7 of them involved fatalities. It just takes one. MnDOT has identified several important grade separations, which would be part of the plan, and 75 to 80 at-grade crossings that go through all of those very communities that we're talking about. And while I've been in some of those communities other than the ones that I represent in my district, everyone that I have talked to, officials there, and all the ones in the district I represent, this is a huge concern. How to make the rail crossings safer. Representative Hornstein had a bill, I had a bill that would have asked the railroads to pay a partial share to help make communities safer from a danger that they've created. These railroads are making huge profits. They are creating these dangers. They're blocking and dividing towns to make it more difficult for first responders and emergency personnel to get from one side to the other. They have a responsibility to help these communities, team up with these communities to help make them as safe as they can be. So members, we've got a year lost. And it's not for a lack of effort. Representative Hornstein and others have been working very hard to get something in place. And what do we get? A token, I don't know what it's called, $5 million. Homeland Security identified that 65 of the 340 fire departments that go through the cities that I just listed all the way through, only 65 of 340, about 20%, have had the proper training for oil train and pipeline safety. 20%. We had funding that would help provide our providers with more dollars, help make them better prepared in case, God forbid, a disaster like this happened. I just don't understand it. I don't understand it. Why, when we've got a situation like this, and by the way, what, 2-3 weeks ago, Central North Dakota, another derailment, another explosion, another fireball. And for some reason, it's just like there's no seriousness from that side of the aisle when we talk about an issue this important. It's ridiculous. $2 billion budget surplus. We are asking the railroads, who are making huge profits, to just pay part of the tab. They're the ones creating the dangers. They're coming through the communities. They're making the huge profits. But no, we're going to throw a little $5 million out here and make it look like we're doing something. I hope the communities here along those routes know what we're not doing today. We're not dealing with this. When it just takes one incident, just one, you have a derailment, you have an explosion, and you have a disaster. And we're just sitting here doing nothing. Now, granted, nothing's assured. And, you know, we've been fortunate. But why in the world would we not do everything possible to make our communities safer, make our crossings safer, better prepare our personnel? We can still vote this down and find the funding to do this. I just don't understand it. I know it's getting late and we're a little lack of sleep, but there's no reason we can't be doing something here. It just doesn't seem to be a very serious issue on a lot of people's minds. So, members, let's refuse to adopt here so we can go back and fix a very, very serious issue, potential danger going through all of our communities. Please, members, please refuse to adopt. Let's go back and put real money in here that we can actually make our communities safer.
The lady from Anoka, Representative Bernardi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in disappointment. We have been elected here to be leaders of our state and to make changes that will help our economy, help our environment, help the health of our communities, and help us to be a successful state. And we are leaving here with nothing when it comes to transportation. Zero investment in our transportation system to meet the future needs of our state. Nothing. As my children sometimes say, nada. We need leadership. And that means we need to come together across the state and with our transportation professionals, people in our communities, people that build our roads, people that maintain our roads. And we need to engage the entire community, from women to young people to millennials to our elderly to people who own a car to people who don't own cars to people who can get easy access to their work to people who can't. We need to engage everyone in this conversation so we build a transportation system that really meets the future needs of the state of Minnesota. Just focusing on funding alone is not going to solve this issue. We need to take a two-track approach. We need to look and create a system that meets the needs now and in the future. And like I said, it's going to take public engagement. We're going to need to hold our transportation agencies accountable to performance measures that really move us forward. Right now, I don't know if you remember, but I passed out a map this last, one of the last times we talked about this, and two maps on the paper. One showed the smoothness rating in which we get our bond rating based on, and it was all green. It was like, full go in Minnesota, we've got our infrastructure covered. But when you look a little deeper and you look at how we really ought to be measuring our infrastructure and what kind of repair it's in and what it needs, you look at the remaining service life of our roadways in Minnesota. And when you look at that, the map is no longer green. There's a lot more yellow and there's a lot of red. Our infrastructure is in disrepair in the state and it's crumbling. When we continue to keep postponing it year after year after year after year, it's going to cost us a lot more money Because roads, it's like a roof. If you take care of it and patch it up and take care of it when a storm goes through and make sure the shingles are good and take care of it as you go, your roof will last a lot longer and you won't have to replace the whole thing at a greater expense earlier on. But when we're allowing our infrastructure to crumble around our communities, we're at fault for that because we are the leaders. We need to bring people together. We have the collective wisdom in the state, but no one is talking about the problem. And it's a cultural problem. It's how we're addressing our transportation systems. You go and you ask, have you talked with your city engineers, your city public works person? Have you talked with the person in your neighborhood down the block who needs to get across the street safely? I was just actually talking to my stepdaughter today, and she was talking about, I know you really care about people being safe in our transportation system. Could you please help me with an issue that I have on Lexington Avenue and somewhere around Como Park? She says there's signs there about pedestrians crossing there, and it's like down all the time because it's been hit by a car, and you risk your life going across. I'm just sharing this story because this is just one example of people wanting to use a safe and accessible transportation system. It's very comprehensive. It goes from, pedestrians actually ought to be the foundation of our transportation system. Have you ever thought about this? What other species in this world would build up barriers to be able to move about on their own? Well, we build up barriers. We make it difficult for people to get to their jobs, to get to transit stops, to get to their schools. And we put a paltry $500,000 for safe routes to schools. Well, we wouldn't even have to have a safe route to school account if we actually had safe routes for everyone. Minnesota is changing. It's getting a lot grayer, including me, and we need a system that meets the needs of people from the time they're a young person. They need to get around to enrichment programs after school, to get to their friends. They need to be able to be mobile and active and not enclosed in their house and stay there because it's so dangerous on moving about in our streets. Our millennials, polls are showing over and over again, they are making decisions where they want to live based on the kind of transportation system in that community. And then you take it a step further, and our businesses are now moving into communities in which the millennials are moving to. So if we create this transportation system that attracts the millennials, and they want to have it to be where they can bike and they can walk, they can move their kids in a stroller, they can get to work on transit, they can maybe afford just one car and be able to live on one car because they have transit opportunities and they can get there safely. They don't want to be stuck for a long time on our roadways. They want a place where transportation really enhances their life. And right now, Minnesota, we are not doing that. And it's going to take our collective leadership to make that happen in the state of Minnesota. I don't know if any of you, I know a number of you probably live here, and I know that you represent these communities. But I'm just going to share with you when the Legislative Office on the Economic Status of Women held listening sessions with over 33 organizations in 8 rural Minnesota communities, which included Duluth, Hibbing, Grand Rapids, Red Wing, Hutchinson, Wilmer, Alexandria, and Fergus Falls. The conversation was about economic security for women. And you know what the #1 issue for economic security for women? Actually, people were surprised. It was transportation. When you start talking with people about their transportation needs, we start connecting the dots of the things that we need to do in Minnesota. And that's being able that people can get to jobs on 2nd and 3rd shifts. That if they can't afford a car or 2 cars, that they can have 1, or they can get to their doctor's appointments. When you start talking about the needs of people, we can now create a transportation system that is awesome and that people will actually want to move to Minnesota and will have a great quality of life. The Minnesota Department of Health did a study, and what they found out was the #1 issue for getting access to health care, three things tied at 85%. It was access to good health insurance, which, that seems to be an obvious one. Another one was access to mental health services. And the other one was transportation. When you start diving down on some of these issues, one of the underlying factors in many, many things is transportation. When the state of Minnesota legislature went around the state and talking about childcare, one of the major issues for people getting their children to quality childcare was transportation. I don't know if you have an aging parent and you're really concerned about them driving. People don't want to give up their keys. They want their freedom and their independence. Well, what happens if they actually had a transportation system in which they could be mobile and independent and have their freedom throughout their life without driving a car? I've heard studies show that people drive their cars 10 years longer than they ought to be. And frankly, that doesn't make our roads safer. When we look at this, it's going to take listening to people and hearing everybody's voice and really addressing this cultural problem on how we have been doing our transportation system. Frankly, it's been siloed and very single-minded, and it's about laying lots of concrete in our state, not caring that we can actually maintain it and take care of it. We need to be looking at not just about moving cars fast. We need to be looking at how we are going to mobility of our people throughout the state, whether it's transit, driving a car, biking, or walking. I had two proposals this last legislative session, and I know other Republicans were sympathetic, and I was, I appreciated the moral support about it and wanting to someday focus on these things, but someday is now. And what I didn't get a hearing on, and it's not included in this bill, is two ways in which to create transparency and accountability to our transportation system. One of the ways is for performance measures and making sure that the state and federal laws are tied to the MnDOT's transportation plans, and then those plans actually get to their projects, and we actually get the kind of roadways that really benefit the community and our state of Minnesota. MnDOT says they already do that, but frankly, we don't have the performance measures. They haven't identified what they're performing, what their performance measures are going to be. We held our universities accountable the last biennium and had them pick some performance measures, set targets, and then report on them. How difficult can that be? Businesses have to do that all the time. And setting, not a moving target, a target that you can report on. And then looking at the life cycle costs of our transportation system. Are we just chasing smoothness now around the state, that underneath that smooth surface, our roadways are crumbling and it's going to be even a worse financial problem in the future? Zero funding today is going to mean a lot more costs in the future. We have disparities gaps in the state. I don't know if you remember at one of our One Minnesota conferences that we had at the University of Minnesota, Greater St. Paul, Minneapolis, or whatever that organization, that business organization is. They had three major goals. Don't remember what the three major goals were, but the underlying issue that they wanted to work on, as I recall, was about the disparity gaps in the state of Minnesota. We hear about all that all the time. Our health disparities, our racial disparities, our educational disparities. We have a lot of disparities in our state. And I believe that our transportation system, the way we're planning it now and building it now and not engaging everybody and hearing everyone's voice, is actually contributing to the disparities in the state of Minnesota. Our transportation system ought to be bridges to prosperity, not barriers to opportunities. So I want to encourage this body to be leaders and to not keep kicking the can down the road and not addressing this problem. Because, you know, our lives will be better, our children's lives will be better, our parents' lives will be better if we truly build a transportation system that really focuses the needs on the people in this state. Not only is it going to be better for the lives of the people in Minnesota, whether it's their health or the economic prosperity or their opportunities to access places in this state, it's also going to be helping our environment. When we focus on a transportation system that reduces our carbon footprint, it's going to make a big difference. I don't know, we aren't really addressing that very much in our state. It's in our transportation goals, but nobody is really looking at it. We need to take this really seriously and address this problem. We can't just keep chasing the quick dollars and trying to fix them without creating a system that really connects communities to one another, creates prosperity, and creates a system that we can maintain in the future for years to come that makes us a shining star and a North Star state in this country where people actually want to come, build their businesses, and raise families. So I urge you to vote against this proposal and take on the challenges of working together, and I look forward to doing that, but we can't wait. It has to happen now, because giving zero to transportation, that's not leadership. We need to have leaders, and we need to all come together and bring Minnesotans along with us to create a transportation system that meets the needs of all people. Thank you.
The lady from Washington, Representative Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. We were elected by Minnesotans to solve problems with great expectations. They expected us to solve problems. There were high hopes. Your committee names for reform and innovation offered hope for these expectations. Instead, we have given them great disappointments. There are so many unmet needs. When we have resources to invest in solving our very real problems, our needs in Minnesota. We heard that no rail, or at least transit rail, was a priority. No rail, but buses. Let's invest in buses. Representative Fenton and I sponsored a bill for several communities, thousands of people, businesses on the Gateway Corridor, the Gold Line, and it's not funded. You've heard of lots of other people with the other issues and concerns, the needs identified. So many needs, so many expectations, so many hopes, and met with great disappointment. Lost opportunities. Well, maybe not lost yet, because we're not done. Maybe they're just missing for the moment. Let's not lose this moment. Send the bill back. Let's get the things done that we can do, because we can do it.
Further discussion. The gentleman from St. Louis, Representative Simonson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And will Representative Kelly yield to a question?
He will yield. The gentleman from St. Louis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Kelly, I'm looking at, well, I've been tracking an issue in the Senate version of their transportation bill. And I know it was in their bill when they went into conference yesterday. It wasn't in our House file, but I do know that it was in the Senate version. So I would presume that the Senate would fight for their position to try to keep this provision. And the provision I'm talking about, and I don't know if this will resonate with you or not, otherwise I'll have to direct you to the right page, but there was an issue dealing with Trunk Highway 23 in Duluth where it intersects with Kingsbury Creek. And there was a provision in the Senate file that would allow when the Highway 23 is reconstructed this summer and next summer, would allow MnDOT to grade a piece of that land to allow for a trail, which would then access the Lake Superior Zoo. And I don't see that in the conference report, and I'm just curious, Representative Kelly, if you could tell me what happened to that particular provision.
The gentleman from Goodhue, Chairman Kelly.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Simonson, we never heard that provision. I never heard that provision brought up by the Senate, so no, that is not part of the bill.
Gentleman from St. Louis, Representative Simonson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will Representative Kelly continue to yield?
He will. The gentleman from St. Louis, Representative Simonson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Kelly, so what I heard you say, and maybe I heard it wrong, but I just want to be sure. So this was a provision that you didn't hear in the House version, and that's why you argued to take that provision out of the conference report?
The gentleman from Goodhue, Chairman Kelly.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Simonson, the Senate never brought that as a provision. There was no request for it in our conference committee.
Gentleman from St. Louis, Representative Simonson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Chair Kelly. So I understand that, so it appears that the provision was in the Senate file certainly before conference, but what I'm hearing you say is that they didn't bring it to conference and didn't bring it up. Is that correct?
The gentleman from Goodhue, Chair Kelly.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Simon, you are correct.
Gentleman from St. Louis, Representative Simonson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Kelly. Well, then I'm just going to get into some general comments about the bill. And what we have here, members, is yet another missed opportunity by the GOP here in the House. I don't know what you did last fall as you campaigned. Everywhere that I went, the number one thing that was brought up everywhere was transportation. Fix the problem, get it done, let's get moving. Everywhere that I went, it was common question, common comment, common discussion. I don't know what you all heard, but that's what I heard. And what I was told to come down here and do was be a part of this solution to the transportation problem here in Minnesota. Whether it's a transit problem in the metro area or whether it's a roads and bridges problem in greater Minnesota, fix it because people are getting upset. So what did you do? You were here for the last 18 weeks. You're in charge of the House of Representatives, and what did you do? Nothing. Missed opportunity. As Representative Winkler likes to say, you did nothing. Because what you've got in this, basically, in this bill here, is not what Minnesotan is looking for. This is not what Minnesotans want. They wanted a solution. They wanted a real solution to a real problem. And you told them, you know what? We don't care about your problem. We don't care about your problem. What we care about and what we've been seeing over the last few days, time and time again, is this piece of paper that lands on my desk that says that the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce supports this bill, or the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce supports that bill. I don't know that I've seen one here for this bill, but I'm sure that's coming because Minnesota Chamber of Commerce seems to be running the House of Representatives. And I don't know what we're doing here, but seriously, all you've talked about is the whole reason we can't get a transportation package is because of the gas tax. I mean, let's talk about the gas tax some more, shall we? Should we bring that up and talk about that? Where is your funding solution for a long-term problem? You couldn't make a deal with the Senate and the governor, so you're walking away. You're telling Minnesota, we don't care. We don't care about your problem. We're so focused in on the gas tax that we just absolutely can't come to an agreement and we're going to walk away. We've got 6 hours. You can send this, we can vote no on this adoption. It can go back to conference. We can come up with a real solution. You can come back here. We still got time to get it done. Minnesotans will be happy. Minnesota doesn't want your Band-Aids, okay? I mean, we've done this for how many times? That transportation has been talked about. And every year that we continue to talk about, it gets worse. these roads get worse. And I know for a fact that a lot of you realize this because you've got these roads, you've got these bridges in your district. And you've got to be hearing the same complaints that I am. I live, in Duluth, but I also hear from outside of Duluth where they talk about the condition of the roads. Why do we have a transportation network system? It's to move people and to move commerce. And if Minnesota state government doesn't step up to the plate and make the necessary repairs, we're going to slow down the movement of people. We're going to slow down the movement of commerce. This state's going to go backwards, and our GDP is going to drop. That's what you're doing here in the Minnesota House, is you're saying to Minnesota, you know what? We don't care because we hate the gas tax. You voted last night in the middle of the night for a hidden $30 million tax increase in an education bill in the middle of the night because you assume nobody's watching. Well, they're watching. They're watching. They probably don't care so much about that maybe, but what they do care is that you didn't solve the #1 problem facing Minnesota right now, and that's our transportation system. It's broken. You should be ashamed.
Further discussion. The lady from Dakota, Representative Mason.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I'll try to make this short, but I have been on the Transportation Committee for a number of years. I have heard from all of your constituencies as they come to our committee meetings and tell us how important it is that their roads need to be upgraded. They need maintenance. And yet, for some reason, as a legislature, we just don't seem to be able to get together to get the comprehensive transportation system that we need to get the funding for that. I have voted against this first time ever for a transportation bill because we need to get the funding, and there really isn't stable funding in here. And I think it's been mentioned before that when we were putting this bill together, I think there were like 50 shifts in here. So it's not the fact that we're bringing new money in, we're not bringing stable money, it's just shifts. Again, we have a surplus. We know that the people of Minnesota expect us to get a decent transportation bill, and we haven't. And I think there's a lack of responsibility and a lack of vision. Certainly, listening to some of the portions of this bill, I mean, there's so many restrictions. There's restrictions on planning. There's restrictions on rail. We need a comprehensive transportation system so that we can compete with other states, with other countries. They are investing in transportation. We need to invest in this if we want Minnesota to be competitive in a global economy. I'm sure that you've heard from so many organizations, be they religious, be they contractors, be they workers. Everybody in our state understands and are expecting us to pass a comprehensive transportation bill. Please, let's send this back. Let's do the job this year that needs to be done. Thank you.
Any further discussion on the adoption of the conference report? The gentleman from Nicollet, Representative Johnson C.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I'm reflecting on this conversation, I'm intrigued by the pathway of a transportation bill. I think Representative Ward and Representative Simonson had it right. A lot of candidates ran in the campaign talking about transportation. I read a lot of newspapers. I listened to the radio. I heard a lot of candidates talking about that. And then I thought one of the most formidable things that happened in this session, it was really important, and I complimented both parties, and I complimented the members in the House that said, yes, we do, the acknowledgement that we needed a long-term comprehensive package for transportation, a long-term solution. That was really agreed to. That was a bipartisan agreement. And then you'll recall the governor went around the state and really laid out exactly the sorts of projects we could see in our districts throughout the state if his package were adopted. it's really clear that Minnesota does want improved transportation. Think of the cities, the townships, the counties, the farm groups, the contractors' labor, the chambers of commerce in Duluth, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Mankato, Marshall, and the lots of editorials in the papers that I've seen those. I bet a lot of you have seen the editorials that have been written in support of a comprehensive long-term transportation package. And here we are today with what's called a lights on bill. I don't know how that fits, but it's really a disappointment. I think everybody in Minnesota is disappointed in us not getting the job done. Would Representative Kelly yield?
The gentleman will yield. The gentleman from Nicollet.
Representative Kelly, are there any funds in this bill for the quarters of commerce?
The gentleman from Goodhue, Chairman Kelly.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Johnson, in this bill, the dollars that would go towards corridors of commerce, there's $213 million that is still left for corridors of commerce in the bonding that is still available.
Gentleman from Nicollet.
Will the chairman yield to another question?
He will yield. The gentleman from Nicollet, Representative Johnson C.
Can you, Representative Kelly, can you help me understand? There's $213 million left over. Is that from last year, or can you help me understand what that is?
The gentleman, Representative Kelly.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Johnson, that is the number that is available for bonding for corridors of commerce.
The gentleman from Nicollet, Representative Johnson C.
Will Representative Kelly yield to another question?
The gentleman will yield. Gentleman from Nicollet.
And Representative Kelly, do we understand that is that $213 million, has it been committed? And if so, is it like Corridors of Commerce has been, is it to about half to the Twin Cities area and half to outside of the Twin Cities?
Gentleman from Goodhue, Chairman Kelly.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Johnson, that $213 million has been committed.
Gentleman from Nicollet, Representative Johnson C.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, will Representative Kelly yield to another question?
The gentleman will yield. The gentleman from Nicollet.
Did I hear you correctly that it has been committed? Can you identify the projects that it's been committed to?
The gentleman from Goodhue, Chairman Kelly.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Johnson, it has been committed, and no, I cannot.
Okay.
The gentleman from Nicollet, Representative Johnson C.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And in your opening comments, I think I'm a natural optimist. I like to brag that I'm a Twins fan. That makes me a natural optimist, and I'm kind of proud to be an optimist. And I remain optimistic for a long-term solution for transportation because I think Minnesotans can work together to solve this problem. I think this problem is solvable. It's not intractable. It's a matter of us in the legislature choosing to do that. And I think there's so much energy behind it in the state that I think it can happen. And Representative Kelly, I'm buoyed by your comments at the beginning. As you introduced this bill, you talked about HF House File 4 is still alive, that it's passed this House. And I respect the job that you and the committee did in passing the bill. I didn't vote for it, but it is a long-term approach to transportation, and it is in conference. And so hopefully we can move along in that. And would Representative Kelly yield to another question?
He will yield. The gentleman from Nicollet, Representative Johnson C.
Representative Kelly, assuming that we just moved through the House here, are you anticipating negotiating on House File 4 anytime in the near future?
The gentleman from Goodhue, Chairman Kelly.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Johnson, I'm sorry, could you please repeat the question?
The gentleman from Nicollet.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker. Representative Kelly, yeah, are you anticipating negotiating on House File 4 anytime in the future?
The gentleman from Goodhue, Chairman Kelly.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Johnson, I look forward to working on House File 4 and our overall transportation plan throughout the year and look forward to March 8th when we get to start up again.
Gentleman from Nicollet, Representative Johnson C.
And thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, would the Chairman yield to another question?
He will yield. The gentleman from Nicollet, Representative Johnson C.
Representative Kelly, can you give us any idea when you would anticipate some conversations happening, perhaps between yourself and your counterpart in the Senate?
Gentleman from Goodhue, Chairman Kelly.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Johnson. Well, as a representative, just as you are, I think part of our job throughout the year is continual conversations and discussions. As we're going out, we're talking to constituents, we're talking to interest groups, we're talking to everyone across the state in regards to their transportation needs. So that would be my anticipation of having discussions on House File 4 and our overall transportation policy until we get to bring it up again and start where we are right now in House File 4.
Gentleman from Nicollet, Representative Johnson C.
And thank you, Mr. Speaker. And would the chair lead, you'll do another question?
He will yield. Gentleman from Nicollet, Representative Johnson C.
You know, at some point, it appears to me that House File 4 has to be reconciled with its Senate counterpart. And in so doing, I suppose in any conference committee, there's compromise. I had the opportunity to observe the Environmental and Ag Conference Committee quite a bit, and it's obvious that they're working down through the bill and all that sort of thing. And I would assume that that would be involved in the work you would be doing with the Senate bill. Can you confirm that you're generally open to compromising with the Senate to come out with a reconciled bill?
The gentleman from Goodhue, Chairman Kelly.
Mr. Speaker and Representative Johnson, as we look at the situation that we're in right now, Representative Johnson, the compromise right now is the Senate took up this bill and voted for it 65-0, unanimously endorsed this proposal right now, suggests that they realize that House File 4 with myself and Senator Dibble, which is in a conference committee right now, and will be in a conference committee when we start on March 8th, is that process. So to the degree that we will be working together, that we'll be working towards the plan that we've put forth, that is exactly where we're at in the process, and we will continue to do so.
The gentleman from Nicollet, Representative Johnson C.
And thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the chairman yield to another question?
He will yield. The gentleman from Nicollet.
Well, Representative Kelly, I just want to return to your opening remarks. Again, my optimism raised a little bit when you talked about House File 4 still being out there as a vehicle that the House is working with, and I bet Senator Dibble probably may have said something similar on the Senate side. We still have the bills that pass both the House and the Senate. We've got the governor's proposal. We still have 3 robust proposals to deal with the transportation system. And I'm just hoping that you are open to compromise between the various approaches. And as I said yesterday on the floor, or the other day anyway, on the floor, I would assume that any compromises, we're going to see parts of the House bill and parts of the Senate bill and parts of the governor's program. That seems to be what compromise is about. And I guess I'm just asking, do you agree with that basic principle that if we do come to a compromise on these long-term bills, that we would see parts of each of those bills in the compromise?
Are you asking the gentleman to yield?
I thought I did. I'm sorry. Yes, I'm asking him to yield, and that's my question.
He will yield. The gentleman from Goodhue, Chairman Kelly.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Johnson, if I was not open to compromise, Representative Johnson, we would not be right where we are today. Part of the compromise process was to keep this bill put together so that parts of both of our plans are already in this transportation bill that did pass the Senate unanimously. Every single one of your senators voted for it, so they apparently agree that we've reached a compromise, Representative Johnson, and I look forward to that same process that we produced over the last 5 months when we start up again on March 8th.
Gentleman from Nicollet, Representative Johnson C.
And thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will Representative Kelly yield to another question?
He will yield. Representative Johnson C.
Is any of that the compromise you're talking about, does any of it include sustainable and predictable funds over the long term?
The gentleman from Goodhue, Chairman Kelly.
Mr. Speaker and Representative Johnson, the transportation plan that we have agreed upon is status quo.
The gentleman from Nicollet.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I do have another question with Representative
He
Kelly.
will yield. The gentleman from Nicollet.
Moving forward, can we count on you to kind of adhere to the interests that were expressed by those chambers of commerce in Duluth, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Marshall, and Mankato, seeking sustainable and predictable funding going into the long term?
The gentleman from Goodhue, Chairman Kelly.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Johnson, just as the Minnesota Chamber endorsed our plan and supported our dedicated funding plans, I look forward to working with all the chambers as we move forward.
Gentleman from Nicollet.
Mr. Speaker, would the chairman yield for another question?
He will yield. Gentleman from Nicollet.
Representative Kelly, really my question was more about not the chambers. It's more the concept of sustainable and predictable funding. I know there's chambers in my area, and I think it's fair to say in Duluth and Marshall and Minneapolis and St. Paul really see, when they're talking about sustainable and predictable, I think they recognize the value of the constitutionally dedicated funds and the funds that we can count on keeping coming, regardless of what happens with budget surpluses and deficits over time. Is that a principle that you could adhere to moving forward to make sure that we have long-term, sustainable, and predictable funding for transportation as requested by those chambers in those 5 cities I mentioned?
The gentleman from Goodhue, Chairman Kelly.
Mr. Speaker and Representative Johnson, I think with you sitting on the Transportation Committee, as many times as you heard the plan, I think you would understand the issue of the dedicated funding. And actually, just like all of us voted here this year, when you voted against a gross receipts tax, 132-0, Representative Johnson. So all of you apparently agree that that is not a dedicated funding source that you were asking for. So the dedicated funding source that we put forth, I think now we probably have agreement that the department, the state, all of us would enjoy actually talking about how we are spending all the dedicated funding sources of sales of auto parts, taxes on rental and lease cars. Wouldn't that be a much better conversation that we were having today, Representative Johnson, if we were spending if there was $800 million for the corridors of commerce that you have made sure to promote all throughout this 5 months? Wouldn't that be a much better conversation to be having? Instead, we were stuck on this conversation about the defining of what is dedicated or not. You did vote 132-0 against the gross receipts tax. So apparently that is not dedicated enough for you. So we found another source for you, and that is where we're at.
Gentleman from Nicollet.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I think all of Minnesota knows what that vote was about. The point is, I think what Minnesota is looking for is a comprehensive long-term package that does have sustainable and predictable funding. And that's what Minnesota seeks. And we can have an argument that there's that sort of funding in the House bill. We can have that argument that there's that sort of funding in the Senate bill. And we can have that argument that there's that sort of funding in the governor's package. But the key is to come to compromise. And the failure of this session is that this body did not come to a compromise, that the transportation bill, that the conference committee that we sent to settle, to reach an agreement, could not reach that agreement. And that's just a failure of this session. And we're all going to go home in a few hours, and I know I'm going to go home, and one of the first questions I'm going to be asked by my neighbor across the street, I know what he's going to ask. He's going to say, why didn't you get a transportation bill? And I think I'll go downtown, and lots of other folks are going to be asking the same thing. And I'll have to just acknowledge we didn't get it because we couldn't compromise. I'm comfortable with compromise, and I said yesterday, I said clearly that it was important that we have a compromise, that we use parts of the House bill, we use parts of the Senate bill, we use parts of the governor's approach, and in that case, we can possibly come to the sort of compromise that can lead to the sort of long-term comprehensive transportation program that we need in Minnesota. Thank you very much.
Discussion to the conference report. The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Hornstein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I just also want to add my voice to those who are recommending a no on adoption of this report. I thought that Representative Johnson really said it very well, that the failure of this session on transportation is that we could not reach a compromise, and I think there were many reasonable compromises that we could have reached. And I don't see Representative Howe, but you know, I'm even starting to warm up to some of his ideas, and I think could be part of a compromise solution to this. But members, we'll talk more on the final when the final conference committee report is voted on. But I just wanted to recommend a no vote. And also, I appreciate Representative Kelly's shout out, and I'll also express my appreciation for his involvement in the committee this year, as well as you know, we have incredible nonpartisan staff in Mr. Lee and Mr. Burris, and I also wanted to thank them here on the House floor. So members, please vote no on the adoption measure.
Discussion. There being no further discussion, all those in favor of the motion to adopt the Conference Committee report on Senate File number 1647 say aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. No. The motion prevails. The clerk will... Can I finish, please? The motion prevails. The clerk will give the bill its third reading as amended by conference. But before we do that, we'll have a division count. All those in favor stand up. Please be seated. All those in opposition, please rise. There being 66 ayes and 57 nays, the motion prevails. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File number 1647, as amended by conference.
Third reading as amended by conference. Any further discussion? The gentleman from Clay, Representative Lean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Well, this certainly is a disappointment and a real missed opportunity. And I do want to go back to the grade separation or the at-grade crossing fundings for the rail infrastructure. $5 million in this bill, members. That's roughly 1.5% for what's needed to provide adequate rail infrastructure funding around the state. And I know we've of course heard about rail safety with the hazardous cargo, with the Bakken crude, but I just do want to bring up one other point. I just want to remind members again that this is also about increased rail traffic, not just the contents of what's being shipped, but the overall increased rail traffic. And again, when I see buses, when I see school kids crossing unmarked tracks without any arms or anything like that, thank God nothing has happened, but I just fear, what if? Just what if? When I see citizens getting to and from work, getting to and from businesses, getting to and from friends and families, having to sit for 15, 20 minutes at a waiting for a train, waiting for 2 trains. One goes past, another one goes by. I just think we need to do better. We need to do better for our communities across the state. And we've heard from members from all across the state. My district, Representative Marquardt's district, I know there are folks on the other side of the aisle, Representative Murphy's district, where this is a serious issue. And I'd just like to close with talking about the emergency first responders. And again, I've said it again, and I just want to remind members also, how crucial this is to see ambulances, to see fire trucks coming up to a grade crossing. The arms come down, they have to somehow pull a U-turn, find another way into the other part of the city. Members, I just can't stress enough how crucially important this issue is, and we need to do better. Thank you.
Discussion. The lady from Hennepin, Representative Hortman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I have 3 reasons I'll be voting no on this bill. The first reason is it doesn't do an adequate job on rail safety. There's a really simple thing that we can do. There's a small proposal that the governor's put forward that would raise a few million a year and over several years would address every single rail crossing in the state that needs to be addressed. That's not in this bill. In the city of Coon Rapids, I have 3 major crossings. I have Hanson Boulevard, Foley Boulevard, and Crooked Lake Boulevard. There's 21,000 people in the city of Coon Rapids who live within a half mile of the railroad tracks, and oil trains go through there every single day. But more significantly, my fire chief is concerned about being able to get from the north end of the city to the south end of the city and vice versa in case of medical emergency or in case of fire. Mr. Speaker, I wonder if Representative Kelly would yield to a question.
The gentleman will yield. The lady from Hennepin, Representative Hortman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Kelly, my understanding is that you don't have the trunk highway bonds for Highway 53 in this bill because it's a Senate file. Is that true?
The gentleman from Goodhue, Chair Kelly.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Hortman, that is correct.
Lady from Hennepin, Representative Hortman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Kelly, it's my understanding if we wanted to do trunk highway bonds to solve our state's Highway 53 problem, that we would need to put that on a House file. If he would yield to that question, is that correct?
He will yield. The gentleman from Goodhue, Chair Kelly.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Hortman, that is my understanding.
The lady from Hennepin, Representative Hortman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, Representative Kelly, I also understand that there's enough debt service contained in this bill that if we were to do those trunk highway bonds on a different bill, that we could pay the debt service out of what you have in Senate File 1647. Is that true?
Gentleman from Goodhue, Chairman Kelly.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Hortman, that is correct.
The lady from Hennepin, Representative Hortman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Kelly, if you would yield to the question of how many votes, if we had a bill, a House file, that we put the trunk highway bonds on for Highway 53, how many votes would we need to pass a bill with solely trunk highway bonds in it?
He will yield. The gentleman from Goodhue, Chairman Kelly.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Hortman, as I understand your question, only trunk highway bonds. That would be a simple majority.
The lady from Hennepin, Representative Hortman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Kelly, if you would yield, have you looked?
He will yield. Representative Hortman.
Have you looked on the General Register to find out if there is a House file relating to transportation that you could put those trunk highway bonds on and we could pass tonight?
The gentleman from Goodhue, Chairman Kelly.
Mr. Speaker and Representative Hortman, I have not.
The lady from Hennepin, Representative Hortman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Representative Kelly, I've got a copy of the General Register, and as we continue debating the bill, I'll be looking for something that's a House file that's related to transportation. And I would suggest, Representative Kelly, that we could, with a bipartisan vote, solve our Highway 53 problem right here on the House floor tonight, because you've got the debt service in 1647. I have every confidence you're going to pass that bill tonight. And we could load up a House file with the trunk highway bonds we need, and we could solve that problem. We might not be able to solve every problem, but we could solve that major problem here tonight, yet there's a lot of time left. So members, those are 3 big reasons I think that we should vote against the bill, and also the $270 million less that we'll be spending on state road construction in the next biennium than what we spent in the last two.
The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Earhart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think there's even an easier solution that Representative Hortman just offered, and that is to get Bach and Doubt to release the balance of the money that's needed out of that $1 billion you're hoarding and pay for it in cash. We don't even have to, we could pick any bill and do that, and all you got to do is get them to say yes. And I think it's $180 million that we need, somewhere around there, because they already have 90. And that's really your answer to this. Anybody worth their salt would have figured that out and got it done. So if anybody's got any salt, that's what we should do. Now let me ask you a couple questions, Representative Kelly, if I might. Will you yield?
He will yield. The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Earhart.
As I understand it, when you came to the first conference committee meeting that we had the other day, or other night, or sometime during the last 2 days or 3 days, whenever it was, flying by they are, you came in, I think it was the Senate that was in charge of the gavel that night, and on the back of an envelope, he passed out, or whoever was in charge of passing out the back of the envelopes, a list of things that I was trying to figure out where this came from, or how to. Well, it comes out eventually through a lot of asking of questions that someone had granted $30 million out of the general fund monies to as a bonus to the conference committee. And what turns out was one of them happened to be missing, but because I couldn't add it up to 30 million, but it eventually came out that there was some 3 million for capital security, and that was the one that was missing. But let me ask about a couple of these items. What is this 3 million Port Development Assistance Program? Where does that go, or what is that about?
The gentleman from Goodhue, Chairman Kelly.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Earhart, that actually goes to the ports.
The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Earhart.
I didn't hear that because of the shouting going on, Mr. Chairman and Representative Kelly. That is going to the port of what?
The gentleman from Goodhue, Chairman Kelly.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Earhart, that's the port development. That is the cities of Duluth, St. Paul, Red Wing, Winona, all of those as port development cities with the economic drivers being somewhere like Duluth and Lake Superior and all the economic traffic that comes through there. That is the port development group that will be benefactors of that $3 million.
The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Earhart.
Thank you. We could probably have Mr. Chairman, we probably should have a breakdown of what ports are getting what there, but I suppose that we scatter 3 million around between half a dozen ports. They'll all get about as much as the 12 million .5 that we're scattering around to the small cities. I don't know if you've seen a list of that or not, but it varies from a little bit to a fair amount. Now, Representative Kelly, is that, if you will yield, Mr. Chairman, will Representative Kelly yield again?
He will yield.
Thank you.
Representative Earhart.
Representative Kelly, is that money, is that ongoing? Is that one-time money, or are we going to really help people out here, or what are we doing? Or are we just doing a little politicking?
The gentleman from Goodhue, Chairman Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Earhart. I'm glad that we were able to put the $12.5 million in. It's actually one-time money as of this transportation bill, but it is a start on our plan that we used the taxes on rental cars for ongoing dedicated funding to the tune of $25 million if we would have had our plan. So all of your cities would have had twice as much dollars as you see the runs there. And as you do notice that if everybody chooses to vote or not vote for this, that's what the cities will or will not get. But on an ongoing basis, as we move into House File 4 next March, that is dedicated funding, and I look forward to delivering that to all the small cities.
Representative Earhart, you still have the floor, but if I could make an announcement, members, if members could please use the side doors so that the sergeant doesn't have to open up those middle doors. It's very distracting when members are speaking. The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Earhart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Kelly, outside of that $30 million there, what other, you know, when you think of a lights on bill, I think you generally think of it as current law, and that's about it. But what other new monies are in this bill besides the $30 million? Can you find any others?
The gentleman will yield. The gentleman from Goodhue, Chairman Kelly.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Earhart, the target that we were given for the this Senate file was $30 million. That is the new money. If you're wondering about the new dollars over base, this transportation plan will spend $450 million over base this next biennium.
Gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Earhart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Kelly, will you yield again, please?
He will yield. The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Earhart.
Where does that $400 million come from, Representative Kelly? What's mixed on that?
The gentleman from Goodhue, Chairman Kelly.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Earhart, the majority of that is out of the Trunk Highway Fund. Approximately $100 million of it is federal funds.
Gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Earhart.
Mr. Speaker and Representative Kelly, well, I think that's money that was projected to come in from whatever sources they're coming from the growth in the various components that are offering the money. Am I correct there? Would you yield again, please, Mr.?
He will yield. The gentleman from Goodhue, Representative Kelly.
Mr. Speaker and Representative Earhart, as I understood the question, you asked what new money would be coming in, and you are right with that. That is actually new money that is generated that will come into the Trunk Highway Fund, along with new money that will come from federal, and it's $450 million above base.
Gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Earhart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That's current law. We didn't enact any law for new money. Actually, that's existing law coming in on, we're not stopping it, we're not creating new, we're just, but, you know, I was looking for the chair of the, I was going to ask Representative Lancheski if she had found any new taxes in this bill, because her acute sense of smelling out a tax just exposed what we looked at in the K-12 bill. Oh, I don't see oh, here she comes. Will Representative Lancheski yield, Mr. Chairman?
She will yield. The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Earhart.
I was wondering, Representative Lancheski, if you have sifted through this bill sufficiently to detect if there's any hidden taxes in here, again, as we experienced your professional eye poking out of the K-12 bill.
Lady from Hennepin, Representative Lancheski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Earhart, I really have not, Chair Kelly, spent a lot of time reviewing your spreadsheet. But I do not believe there are any tax increases in this bill, but maybe Chair Kelly can help you out with that. Thank you.
The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Earhart.
Thank you, Representative Lancheski. Yes, I would like to ask Representative Kelly to yield.
He will yield. The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Earhart.
Have you discovered, Mr. Chairman and Representative Kelly, any hidden taxes in here as you're getting help from the experts from the 6th floor?
The gentleman from Goodhue. Goodhue. Chairman Kelly, are you hiding any taxes?
Mr. Speaker and Representative Earhart, the question is no, and if Representative Lincheski has looked through it, I would absolutely be willing to say that unequivocally that would be no.
Gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Earhart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Kelly. You know, just looking back at some of the things that have transpired since I started working on transportation here in about 2003, I think it was, around there. The national scene has gone from bad to worse, or from not too bad to worse. You know, around the last person to at the national level was Ronald Reagan, president, who said we need to raise the gas tax. And he's a conservative, any of you remember him. And he said, our forefathers built these highways, and now we got to keep them up and pay for them. So he signed off on a 5-cent increase in the gas tax. Now, that was a long time ago. It was 4 cents for roads and bridges, and 1 cent for transit. And that's what he did. Now, every once in a while, you have to think about renewing some of that. And you all know that the Federal Highway Trust Fund is running dry, and it has been, and it's been bolstered by money from the general fund and elsewhere, and they keep continuing a continuing resolution going that every few months they have to come back and argue about it some more. You know, and out there now we've got a whole bundle of legislators that can't bring themselves to the fact that they have a very valuable asset, our transportation system that's falling apart. And if they want to keep it up, they're going to have to put some money on the table and into the trust fund. But they are refusing to do that. You know, when we come to Minnesota, we had bills here in 05, 07, and 08, and you know what? Those were bipartisan bills going off this floor. I would stand in my seat over there and I'd say, this is the amendment I'm going to do. And I'd have people come over and sign it from both sides of the aisle. That's when I was on that side of the aisle, by the way. And we passed it in 5, and the governor vetoed it. And then we did it in 07, and the governor vetoed it. You know, we have the opposite situation now. We have people sitting on their hands that won't sign on to a bill, and a governor that's inclined to sign one if it heads his way. And I remember some of the people that would not sign on, however, not everyone did, and they were my friends, the Republicans. Some of them are still in this chamber, and some of them are in the Senate chamber. And I remember Highway 14 has been on my mind. I wake up at night thinking about that. For the last 10 or 15 years, I keep thinking, I hope Highway 14 gets by without any accidents or any kind of crucial things happening down there, and we can get them fixed up with some money and put the lanes that they need in there. But at that time, I remember one of the representatives coming into the Finance Committee of Transportation, bringing 2 or 3 mayors from the corridor and saying, we have to have this money. And I would say, well, that's very good. But can we go out, but will you vote for this transportation funding bill? And so the answer was no. Well, let's go out in the hall and talk about that. So I take them out there and say, Mr. Mayor, and Miss Mayor, how about convincing your representative here that they got to vote for, if they want that Highway 14 fixed, why don't you convince this person to vote for, she has the power to do that. Why don't you, oh, well, we'll go back to Highway 14 territory and talk about it. And then there was that flock of people from up on the northwest corner that wanted 610. 610, but they never wanted to vote for any money for it. Now, some of those are still around here, and they still don't want to vote for it. One of the senators, I remember, I'm not divulging any of the names here, but one of the senators was sitting in conference committee complaining about no money for 610, and that's going to be a lot of great development up there. So I said, well, listen, why don't you help out with a vote? And that was the end of that conversation. So we've got a reversal now, but we still have people that want to support this. We got a governor that's willing to support it, but a body apparently that do not want to. And aside from Representative Kelly, I know that we're always talking about dedicated monies, and you're saying one thing, and the people that really think that money should be dedicated in a different way are saying another. But the fact is that they do have a definite advantage of talking about their dedication, which is constitutional. Oh, I know that we fixed the. There was one other thing. There was somebody that was always complaining about his bridge, and I don't see him here, but we did get him, and he didn't vote for the bill, but we did get him his new bridge after we voted the 2008 gas tax increase. And as a matter of fact, I think we finally closed on 610. The Central Corridor and about everything that's been done is on that bill that was passed in 2008. Now, of course, the governor vetoed that stuff again, like always. And that was his history. So what we did was decide six Republicans. And two of us are still here, Representative Hamilton and Representative Earhart. And we said, hey, it's time, you know, we just had that bridge fall down, folks, and we need the money. We got other bridges we discovered. So we overrode them, and that was not very, there were only two that came back out of that mess, if I remember right. It was Hamilton and Abler. And then Abler disappeared and I came back. So that's where we are sometimes. Now, I just don't understand the mindset. I really don't understand. You want everybody take care of their health and their safety when they're on the roads, and assuming that you also understand that some people don't drive cars, don't want to, or can't, that we need transit. We need transit in the metro area, and we need transit in the growing out-of-state areas that want it. So Representative Kelly, can you tell me any reason outside of it's a tax increase? If you want to say it's a tax increase to raise the gas tax, to raise the other fees that we need, I understand that it's a mindset that you can't shake off. I mean, I understand that. Would Representative Kelly yield for the question?
He will yield.
Kelly, is there some reason? Is it in the soup, in the water, or what? You can't say, if you want to do the job, you got to pay for it. And I know you want to pay for it another way, but you got to, can you tell me that?
Gentleman from Goodhue, Chairman Kelly.
Mr. Speaker and Representative Earhart, Representative Earhart discussed this many times. We're in a situation where we've got a $2.1 billion surplus. Even yourself voted for the bill when we were talked about the dedicated funding sources. You voted for it here on the floor. We're simply using dollars that are already there. We've already taxed the state of Minnesota apparently $2.1 billion more than what we needed. So we have the opportunity here to prioritize, and that's what we're doing here with transportation. So why would we incur more taxes, more regressive taxes on the state when we've got a fund balance that we get to, as representatives, decide where it goes right now?
Gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Earhart.
Well, I'm going to tell you why, Representative Kelly, and that is because you cannot squeeze enough of the surplus into a meaningful long-term bill. And that's why when I put that package together that I know you know about, because I asked Knobloch to be there, as a matter of fact, so he could take that back to your caucus. But that was something that I put together last summer when I was at one of the seminars that one of the groups were holding. I said, yeah, I got a different way of looking at this. And I happen to believe that you should use some of that current surplus, along with the other things that need to be done with that surplus. And that a compromise is necessary between using some of the surplus, but we also need, you're only going to raise, I don't know, $6-7 billion, but you also need the monies from the new, in quotes, really dedicated money, the gas tax and the fees, and the taxes on the tab fees and the license tabs, the sales taxes and so forth. You need all of those. You need to put both of those together. But you have to compromise. You have to think about it. You have to think like you're not screwed into a little box and and Grover Norquist is not looking over your shoulder, or whoever the current guy might be. What? He's still looking. Oh, he's still looking. Well, he hasn't sent me a form to fill out lately, so I haven't paid any. I didn't know he was still around. Well, with that, I would say that we are just cresting, looking over the cliff here. And we should, it's really easy. If you're going to vote for a $6 billion bill, you only do it once, you know. You might as well vote for 10 or 12 billion and satisfy this thing. Because if you guys are going to be here for a while, you're going to be back fussing with this in a few years unless you do it right. If you do a sizable bill that's really worthwhile, then you don't have to worry about it for a while, because it's going to be reoccurring as the population grows and the roads crumble away and the bridges fall down. And you haven't got a crisis right now with the bridges, but you might have one tomorrow. So I think it's only fair to say that we ought to put this bill to bed and give it a bad vote and let it go. Thank you.
Further discussion? The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Hornstein.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Well, this was going to be the transportation session. You know, everybody, we came in, the talk shows, the pundits, even the leadership, the governor, Senator Bach, Speaker Dowd. We're going to get transportation done this session. It's an urgent need. And now here we sit with a status quo bill. But I will say, members, that there was one bit of ray of hope and light that I think is important. At the beginning of the session, I thought we were going to be arguing about a number. I thought we might get to this point where nothing would happen, but we would spend all of our time arguing about what the need was. Well, I was pleased that we came to some bipartisan consensus on numbers that were pretty close. They weren't identical, but the Republican numbers, at least on roads and bridges, and transit's a whole nother story, but at least on roads and bridges, we weren't that far apart. And so that's hopeful. But yet we fell short. We fell way short with this bill. We can do so much better than this, because transportation demands so much more than the status quo. And on that we agree. We also missed an opportunity on rail safety. Others have talked about that. But we're still not at the end here, not necessarily tonight, but for our entire session. And so maybe we're at halftime, because we are coming back on March 8th, as Representative Kelly said. And the cynics will say, well, we can't get this done in election year. But that bipartisan override that Representative Earhart talked about happened in election year. So I'm going to try to stay somewhat optimistic on an otherwise very bleak night for transportation. And that is, there is a pathway to compromise, and I hope that we can do this. And I hope that we can have the courage, even in election year, to do this. Because there is at least some modicum of bipartisan recognition of the problem. And we won't solve it without significant new revenue. And we won't solve it with shifts and gimmicks and moving money around from the general fund to address this issue in a very short-term, cursory way. But there are some things I think our side may be willing to give up on. And as I said earlier, I thought Representative Howe brought some good ideas that I'm starting to warm up to. And so, members, let's make sure that we send an important message to Minnesotans that the status quo should not hold. And that's what a no vote means on repassage. Because a yes vote is for a status quo that's inadequate. Let me conclude, Representative Kelly, I know that on this rail safety issue, you have opened up a line of communications with the railroads. And so I hope that you will continue, and all of us together who've expressed concern can make sure that when we reconvene, that we do make progress on this issue. I'm very disappointed that we didn't now, because we could have and we should have. And the railroads do need to step up. So I'd encourage you to continue your efforts. And I would encourage all of us to continue to take this issue seriously. And for all of those in the state who have spent so much time advocating for this, our work is not over this session. This is halftime. We need to redouble our efforts. The editorial writers, many of whom wrote supportive editorials about raising new revenue and the governor's plan and Senator Rock's plan, continue to write those editorials. And the advocates from the business community, and we had increasing numbers of chambers of commerce for the first time going on record on this issue. But we still need more. The business community cannot continue to stand on the sidelines on this issue, or even advocate for the status quo, which some of them did. And of course, the public sector and the commodity groups and so many people weighed in. You need to continue to weigh in, Minnesota. This issue is not going away. And as I believe Representative Bernardi said, the more we delay, the more expensive it gets. Transportation challenges don't go away. They simply get more expensive. And that's one of the main disappointments we have in tonight's bill. So I hope we can move forward from tonight. Again, we missed a golden opportunity. This is very disappointing. Members, vote no.
The gentleman from Hennepin, Leader Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I don't know if you remember the movie Dead Poets Society, but there's a scene in that movie where the Robin Williams character has his class gathered in front of a trophy case, and with some pictures of some people that were in the school 100 years ago, and he has them lean in and listen to what they're saying. And what he said is, seize the day, carpe diem, seize the day. I don't know if you remember that. Well, when we started this session 4.5 months ago, I think we were all leaning in and hearing those words. This is the time to seize the day. We had a $2 billion surplus, a rapidly recovering economy, a budget that was in structural balance for the first time in a decade. And now we're here 4.5 months later, and where are we? Higher ed. Tuition freeze was a huge opportunity. Republicans said no. Economic relief and flexibility for families under the Working Parents Act, the Republicans said no. Broadband investment. Probably the biggest economic development driver that we could do for Greater Minnesota, the Republicans said no. Property tax relief for farmers, the Republicans said no. Making sure that we can keep our kids' class sizes smaller and that we're not going to avoid teacher layoffs. The bill we voted on early in the morning, this morning, the Republicans said no. 5% campaign, people that have been down here over and over and over again all session. The Republicans said no. And all to give away money to big corporations, to save that money on the bottom line so next year you can come back and pass your tax bill that focused on giving money to all those folks that don't even live in Minnesota, these big property owners. And then we come to this bill. Transportation, we hear Speaker Doudt say even in the last week, the #1 priority of the session. Transportation was supposed to be the issue of this session, and this is where we are. Members, the transportation session has been a failure. And it's been a failure because you refused to compromise. I challenge you to point to one time in this transportation discussion, one point, one place where you offered a compromise. Chair Kelly, in your closing remarks, I would love you to identify one time when you actually offered to compromise from your position. You didn't, not once, not one penny. We all agree that there's a huge problem here. Minnesotans understand that there's a huge problem here. And with this bill, you're taking a pass. You're letting Minnesotans down. The transportation session has been a failure.
The gentleman from Goodview, Chairman Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members, and thank you for all of your thoughts. One of the things that I think we do have to address, Representative Marquardt, Representative Hornstein, I appreciate your passion in regards to rail safety. And Representative Marquardt, you said something that you're exactly right on. Even if one person is harmed, it's too many. But one thing that you kept saying that I think really needs clarification, you said that the railroads caused this danger. The railroads didn't cause this danger. They are mandated to carry the commodities across this country. So, if anything, what we need to be doing at this point in time is reaching out and partnering with the railroads to make sure that we are addressing both rail grade crossings and derailment. As Representative Hornstein said, I have reached out and I've stated that we would work with them and we would come up with a plan. During this time period, the railroads have been meeting. And only a few days ago, they came up with a plan that they were offering to increase their involvement and their investment into rail grade safety by 2 times the amount they're doing now. They offered to increase rail inspections, to partner with the state of Minnesota, with MnDOT, and to increase rail inspections, to have a plan for the next 2 years to inspect every piece of track in the state. They offered to work with MnDOT on a plan that ranks all the rail grade crossings in the state so that we would have prioritize and work with them and improve them. And what did that get them? We brought that to the governor and we talked about it and it was balked at. It said, we don't even feel like that's a proposal. So when we talk about partnering with the railroads instead of wanting to maybe vilify them, maybe we should take a step back and think about what's going on and what they're actually doing. You've heard it many, many times. They're investing $500 million into the state of Minnesota. They're doing this to improve tracks, to improve their own business, to improve the flow of traffic throughout the state. And yet, all our response is we want more money from them. We can either be part of the problem or we can be part of the solution. I think we have an opportunity still to partner with the railroads, and I believe that we will still get part of that plan going forward. So that's what my commitment is to you, Representative Marquardt, and everybody, Representative Hornstein, who has, because we do have all those concerns. We know the FRA has gone through and had many new initiatives like the tank car standards or the new braking standards, new operation protocols. Everybody is concerned with rail safety. So instead of trying to find blame and fault somewhere, let's work together, and it's my commitment that we will continue to do that. All throughout your comments, I heard one phrase, and it had to do with lost opportunity. And wow, we really, really did lose an opportunity. And Leader Thiessen, you asked me, where did we ever compromise in our plan going forward? Well, a few weeks back when we took a vote, and it was 132-0 for the gross receipts tax, in my mind, we all agreed. We all agreed that we did not want a new gas tax. So where was the compromise? Who was I supposed to compromise with when everyone in this chamber agreed that no new tax was the way to go? So from that time forward, I looked forward to working with, where does all the money go? Representative Johnson, is $800 million enough for corridors of commerce, or isn't it? Wow, that would have been a great conversation. Apparently it wasn't.
was having the small cities plan, $25 million as a start, and have dedicated funding for the next 10 years enough? Look at the printout, all your small cities. Again, you can decide whether to vote for them or vote against them. That's certainly your call. We put together a $7 billion transportation package, and you took a vote saying that you didn't think the sales tax was the right way to go, so apparently you were in agreement with new revenue. We found the new revenue, and you balked at it. So Representative Hornstein, I absolutely look forward to March 8th. I think we have a platform that we can stabilize transportation funding and look into the future, far into the future, and put a plan together that will prioritize it like the state of Minnesota asked us to do. For right now, I'm asking you to support this motion for repassage because this is where we're at. This is the compromise we're at. It'll take us another 9 months to get to March 8th, and we'll start over, but I'm confident that we will pass this, and I look forward to your support. Thank you.
The clerk will take the roll. Members, please vote. The clerk will close the roll. Okay. Representative Considine changes from no to aye. There being 76 ayes and 59 nays, the bill is repassed as amended by conference and is title agreed to.